So let's start with early street photographers. Early street photographs here. Here we have Latrigues Avenue in Paris, and we have this woman, high fashion, right? She's wearing fur and she's walking her two dogs. Then we have Henri Cartier-Bresson. We have here, we've seen this image many times before, of a man jumping into puddles. So now let's shift to the 1960s, all right, and how far street photography has come. So we have here Gary Winogrand, and he had a career in fashion photography. Um, but after that, he began to roam the streets of New York City with his 35 millimeter Leica wide angle lens camera. Um, Leicas were perfect cameras for on location. They were small, they were compact, they were very, very strong. He's well known for his portrayal of American life and societal issues of that time. So, as a street photographer, he was not photographing events, but he was rather creating singular photographs directed by intuition. So we can see here, this is New York World's Fair. These are people sitting on a park bench, talking to each other, right? So this is just a snapshot of what is going on in the 60s. So here we have this beautiful image here. This is in Los Angeles, 1969. We have this wonderful afternoon light shining through the center, creating these shadows, creating viewpoints, right? Directing our eyes, kind of making a V. Now, there's a lot going on in society in Los Angeles in the 60s. Um, right now, we're focusing just on three women walking in the street, but on the left, we have a man sitting in a wheelchair, head down. On the right, we have people waiting for a bus. He also brought a lighthearted and whimsical side as well to some of the street photography. Right, this one right here, we got this woman laughing with an ice cream cone outside of one of the shops. Here's a collection of images from him. It's called The Animals in 1969, and this collection was taken at the Central Park Zoo and the Coney Island Aquarium, and it examines humans' relationships with the animals in the zoos. It's Winogrand's most well-known body of work. So here we have Central Park Zoo. We have these two people, right, holding a pair of monkeys dressed up. So we don't really know what's going on. Were these part of the zoo? Or what, right? It makes you wonder here in this image. So he kind of wants to showcase how we interact, right? These animals are in cages behind us. This couple, not even paying attention to it, but just relaxing, looking at each other, having some sort of conversation, while this wolf is kind of gaining attack on them, right? So we can interpret these pictures in any way we want, negatively because maybe it's a zoo and they're caged, or just as an interaction between people. So here we have Lee Freelander, and his work is definitely more self-conscious than that of Winogrand's work. You're going to see that. It's definitely more artistic. I don't like to say that because Winogrand created some beautiful images, but they definitely had a different spin on them. He explored dramatic cropping, reflections, obstructed views. He wanted to show how the photograph was made and how it could be altered greatly afterwards. Here we start to see that different angle crop situation that he's doing, right? We're kind of off-centered here. We have this tight crop of this reflection in a building, this image on the window. So here we see Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Now here's a definite different view of it. We have a building, we have the reflection in the center of Mount Rushmore. We see the president's faces carved into the mountainside. We see tourist photographers here at the bottom. Well, one has binoculars looking. One might have a camera. We see people gathering on the right. Whether they're in the building, yep, those look like they're in the building. So this play of foreground, background, reflection here. Yes, the key part of the image, Mount Rushmore, is centered, but we have all these different elements. So our eye is jumping back and forth from that background, that reflection into the window, to the people in the foreground, to the people into the store there. Here's one of my favorites. This is New Orleans, 1969. So we have a side mirror here. We can't even, right? The edges are all blurred, but we see that the building, the sign in there. On the left, we see a man looking over. We have a car in front of us. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to look at. It's showcasing foreground, background, middle ground, everything here. So he really plays with natural elements, man-made elements. So here we have this photo in Knoxville, Tennessee, right? We have this backward street sign. We have a mobile home, a house behind it. Now, right above the street sign, we have perfectly placed clouds, right? They look like they're just sitting there, taking a little rest. We also have the reflection of the sign underneath it. It's a simple photo, but when you look at it and you really pay attention to all the different elements, it's much more complex than that. So we're going to start looking at his first book that he was published in. It was a collection of self-portraits he took in the 1960s. And he approached this series with humor and wit and intentionally presents himself in ways that would otherwise seem wrong or a mistake. Right here, technically, right, we have a shadow of him over this woman with this hair and this big fur collar. And if you look, it does have a play on it too. You see the shadow of Lee Freelander, and where his hair would be, you see that fur. You see that fur collar sticking up. It is comical. It's funny. Um, So Bruce Davidson here, in the spring of 1959, he spent several months photographing a group of Brooklyn teenagers who called themselves the Jokers. So he called this collection, this Brooklyn gang here, New York City. This photograph is taken in 1959. You have this teenager, right? She's looking at her reflection, doing her hair. The gentleman is wearing a t-shirt, rolling up his sleeve. So we're showcasing this young culture going on at the time. He focused on the attention of this subculture going on in Brooklyn, this specific gang of young people. Here we have another series of photographs, The Bike Riders by Danny Lyon. And now Danny Lyon was a photojournalist. He's also a member of the Chicago Outlaw Motorcycle Club. And he chose to document the abandon and the risk involved in this counterculture. They differed greatly from this peace and love hippie movement that was also occurring at the same time, which we're going to see some images of in the future. So now let's look at Vivian Maier, mostly unheard of until recently. Maier was a nanny in Chicago and she worked as a street photographer during her spare time. She created over 150,000 negatives during her lifetime. Her work was not discovered until after her death, and it was found at a few different estate sales by one person. It's quite interesting. I'm going to make you watch a little video after this that talks about her even more. So Maier would often get very, very close to her subjects and present them in confrontational glances, whether they're looking straight at her or looking off. Here we see the man on the street trying to eat something, obviously a little disgruntled, maybe that she's even taking his photo. On the right, we have this woman in a fur coat, looking over her shoulder, maybe waiting for a cab or whatever she's waiting for. Roberta Smith of the New York Times wrote that Maier's work may add to the history of 20th century street photography by summing it up with an almost encyclopedia thoroughness. She veers close to just about every well-known photographer you can think of, including Ouija, Robert Frank, Richard Avedon, and then sliding off into another direction. She maintains a distinctive element of calm, a clarity of composition, and a gentleness characterized by a lack of sudden movement or extreme motion. So because of her experience working as a nanny, she had an affinity for photographing children. This is probably a child that she had worked for or worked with. This is a self-portrait, New York City, and you can see, her idea of cropping and using a frame inside of a frame, holding her camera, this kind of stoic look on her face. She was truly able to capture emotion and feeling in every photograph that we're looking at, whether it's children playing or adults crossing the street. She really had an eye for composition and storytelling. So we're discussing photojournalism in the 60s. This post-World War II era is referred to as the golden age of photojournalism. And it created superstars such as Robert Capa and W. Eugene Smith that we've seen before. So here we have Robert Capa, the American troops landing on the beach of Normandy, and then we have W. Eugene Smith, Spanish Village. We've seen these in previous presentations. So in photography magazines of the 50s and 60s, such as Life, Look, Paris Match, and Picture Post, some of these obviously don't exist anymore. We haven't even really heard of them. It was difficult to decipher a particular style that was unique to a photographer because all of them had a goal of documenting what was going on. Beyond a complete story, press photographers were present with their hands on the shutter, ready to go, capturing noteworthy events in a singular, iconic image. So, a crucial time in photojournalism is the civil rights movement. Photography played a pivotal role in documenting this in the 1950s and the 1960s. It raised public awareness of the plight of African Americans that were subject to racial segregation laws in the South. So here we have Robert Frank trolley. So we have people sitting on a trolley in New Orleans, 1955. We can see that we have African Americans towards the back. We have whites in the front of the bus here, or the trolley. So it kind of shows that class structure and the separation. When we talk about the civil rights movement, Gordon Parks is so influential. We've seen some of his work before. Um, he really documented and showed people what was actually going on. Um, it really opened some people's eyes, especially throughout the country, that might not have seen all of this going on. It promoted change. Here we have on the left drinking fountains, and we can see, one is specifically says for coloreds only, and one says whites only. Um, so we can see this dichotomy here of class structure and the discrimination that was going on. Now here's some work from Bruce Davidson. This is called Time of Change. And here we see a woman sprayed by police hoses at the Birmingham protest in Alabama in 1963. Again, another poignant shot to showcase what was going on at the time. Here's another one from Bruce Davidson. Here's the Great Freedom March. We have Martin Luther King right in the center. We can see flags behind. We see people joining hands and arms. So now let's get into photojournalism and the Vietnam War. So the photographers of the Vietnam War were given more access than ever before, and it resulted in some singular images that became immediately ingrained in the public's consciousness. You're going to see some of these images. You've definitely seen them before. You might not know who photographed them or the specifics behind them, but they're very well known. This image specifically is ingrained in a lot of people's minds. It's showing a napalm strike. We have children fleeing. We have a young girl who is stripped down because her clothes were on fire, and she just took them off. And it's a very interesting photo because it's juxtaposed next to these officers who are kind of just walking around blasé about it. So it showcases what was just going on during the time. These terrible things are happening. These officers who, are seeing these things every day, unfortunately, and kind of just are numb to it. So here we have Joseph Kudelka, and he started off as an acclaimed theater photographer in his 30s. He had never made pictures of a news event before, but on August 21st, that would change. He photographed Soviet tanks invading the city of Prague, which ended the short-lived political liberalization in Czechoslovakia that came to be known as Prague Spring. So this image is his most famous. It's from the Prague invasion, and it's a very stark image. It records the exact moment when the protesters had withdrawn from the center of Prague. And this stopped the Soviets from acting violently towards the citizens, hoping for liberal reform as opposed to communism. So here we see his hand with the exact time this is happening. It's very poignant. So Kudelka spent the next week in the streets, breaching the barricades, climbing aboard tanks, witnessing peaceful outrage of his compatriots, and the sporadic violence of the invaders. More than 100 Czech citizens had died. So, in the midst of all this turmoil, these series of photographs miraculously got smuggled out of the country. And a year after they reached New York, Magnum Photos distributed the images, but they credited it to an unknown Czech photographer. They avoided reprisals and retaliation to this photographer by not including who it was. The images had won the prestigious Robert Capa Photojournalism Award, um, and people still didn't know who had taken the photographs at this time.